Did you know you can edit your image straight from the histogram by dragging on it, left and right? More about that in a second. What is histogram and how do we use it? Well, most editing programs have some sort of histogram, and also you will find it in the back of your camera. If we look at the histogram over here, this is in Lightroom. We see these gray mountains, and on the left side, this represents the very blacks of your image. Next to it, we'll find the shadows. In the middle, no surprise, midtones. Then we have highlights and pure whites. So, how do we read this histogram? If we look here, we see we have a lot of shadows, which are represented by this foliage. We have a ton of midtones with a lot of colors. The gray mountain represents the luminance in your image. The colors are the color channels. We have cyan, we have blue, green, magenta, yellow, all the color channels. So we have no pure whites in this image. As you can see, we have some very light colors, but not pure whites. And when your luminance channel touches the very right or the very left, that is called clipping. That means you are losing information either in the highlights or the shadows. What do I mean by that? Well, we have these triangles on the very top, and if we click on it, this is for the blacks. Now we're clipping some blacks in the very bottom over here, where you see this blue color. If I move the blacks to the left, you will see we're clipping more and more and more. And clipping means we have pure blacks in there, and that means we cannot recover any information. There is no data in there, just pure black. Same thing with the whites. If I click this triangle and I'll move my whites to the right, we're starting to clip right here on the sky. And let's say we clip a lot of the sky, and I'll turn my warning triangles off. You see that is pure white. There's no information in there. So let's see some different examples that will show us exactly this. If I take this example, we have a white desert on a white plate on a white background. What can we read from this histogram? Well, we can see clearly we are clipping the highlights, which is probably the background. The background is completely clipped. There's no information there, no details. We're also clipping some on the top of the desert. And there's no blacks or pretty much midtones in this image. You see this in the black, there's nothing, no information here. So there's no blacks in my image. There's no midtones pretty much. Everything is just on the right side. So let's see, if I turn on my clipping, you will see, just like I said, background and the top of the desert has the red. That means there's no information there. Same thing if I take a dark image here. We do not have any information on our whites and highlights. That's because there's pretty much nothing in the picture. It's just dark tones. But we do have a lot of dark shadows and blacks, and we are clipping the blacks. If I turn on the clipping, you will see there's no information here. Everything is pure black. So how can we use this? Let's see. Let's give you a few more examples. Oh, this one is an interesting one. If you look here, you will see that nothing is clipped. We're good on the highlights, we're good on the shadows. The gray mountains are kind of like in the middle, which is great for this image. But now we see our color channels. We can read from this histogram that we have a lot of blue information in the water and the highlights, which you can see the water looks pretty much blue. If I want to change the tone of the water so it doesn't look as blue, I can move the temperature. Watch what happens here with the color channels. As I move the temperature to the right towards a warmer tone, you will see that the blue will move towards the shadows and the red and yellow will move towards the highlights because we are introducing a lot more warmer tones. So I'm going to start dragging the temperature, and just like you can see, now we have pretty much yellowish water. As I move it to the left, the same thing, we will move the red and the yellows a little bit more to the left, and we're introducing a lot of blue on the highlights and even clipping. Let's take a different example. There is this misconception that your histogram should be perfectly in the middle. Well, that is not truly correct. So here we have a lot of dark tones. We have a little peak of highlights. No, we're not clipping any whites. The highlights are represented by the sun rays. And the dark tones are here on the left side and on the bottom. but we're not clipping anything. So in this case, the image is perfectly exposed, but everything is kind of shifted to the left with a little bit on the right. I'm gonna give you this example over here. This is a white cup against a white background, and there is no dark information. There is no pure blacks, there is no shadows. It's just pretty much highlights and a little bit of midtones, but we're not clipping any whites. And when you are looking at the back of your camera and you're photographing something light on light where there's no really dark information, and your histogram is on the very right without clipping anything, then you're probably exposing correctly, because that's what represents our image. It's all light. If I move the exposure to move my histogram as in the middle, now we're underexposed. We don't get a white cup and white background anymore. Everything just turns gray. The same thing with the darks. If you're photographing a dark object on a dark background and your histogram looks something like this, where all your information is on the left side, that is a very accurate representation of your scene. You're not clipping any blacks, like in this image, it's not clipping any blacks, but you have no information in the highlights or midtones other than this tiny faint little line, which is represented by these little highlights on the dish. So in this case, it represents accurately the scene. If I'll move the exposure to move the histogram in the middle to spread it evenly, we have an overexposed image and it doesn't represent our scene. We don't have a black dish against a black background anymore. I hope this all makes sense. Let's take another example. And this here we have this man against a white wall. And you can see that from the histogram. We have a really tall peak here on the right, and we are clipping a little bit. I will show you that. And then we have this tiny peak over here on the left in the shadows, which is represented by the man and his black clothing. If I turn on my picking warnings, and now you will see this red on the shoes. Let me just zoom in for you. So we have no information there on the highlights. Those are clipped. They are pure white. Same thing with between the bricks. We have these red lines over here. That means we're clipping the whites. We are not clipping the blacks. We are staying away from the very left there. Let's take one more example. This is our last example. And here we have a lot of information on the right side, on the highlights. We're not clipping whites. We do not have any pure blacks or shadows pretty much. This is kind of like a mid-tone towards highlights, and that is represented very accurately by our histogram. We have a lot of yellow and reds, which is kind of the background, has these like, golden tones. And yeah, this is how you will read your histogram. And yes, this is the very blacks on the left side. Then you get shadows, midtones, highlights, and whites. And if you drag on your histogram, if I drag it to the left, let's say, you see the sliders are moving underneath. You can pretty much edit your image from your histogram, but I would not recommend this. It does not really give you that much control, and it's kind of just awkward. It's so much easier to just edit by using your sliders. That's it for today. I hope this was helpful and you learned something new. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. If you want to not miss my future videos, click that notification button. My name is Skyler Ewing. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.